Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The Takeoff of Assumptions. Naomi Carter stood in line at gate 14, her heart swelling with a quiet satisfaction. The priority tag on her boarding pass wasn't just a status symbol, it was a testament to years of hard work and resilience. She had spent over a decade working her way up in the corporate world, balancing late nights, early mornings, and constant challenges to prove her worth in rooms where her presence was often questioned. But today, this first-class ticket represented more than a seat on a plane, it was her small, personal celebration. The airport bustled with its usual chaos, hurried footsteps, the beeping of electric carts, and muffled announcements over the intercom. Naomi rolled her sleek carry-on bag behind her, her professional demeanor marked by a tailored blazer and neatly styled hair. She had an innate ability to command respect without demanding it, a skill honed over years of navigating spaces where she often felt unseen or underestimated. As Naomi neared the gate, she caught a brief glance from the couple in line behind her. Their gaze lingered a moment too long, their smiles polite but distant. It was a look she had come to recognize, a silent question of whether she belonged. She dismissed it, reminding herself of the countless barriers she had already overcome. Still, the unease crept in, like a faint shadow trailing behind her confidence. Patricia Miller, the gate attendant, greeted passengers with a practiced smile. Her crisp uniform was paired with a voice that carried an air of authority. Naomi stepped forward, presenting her boarding pass with a calm assurance. Patricia scanned it, her expression shifting subtly. "This is for first class," Patricia stated, her voice neutral, but her eyes scrutinizing Naomi's appearance. "Yes, that's correct," Naomi replied, her tone steady. She resisted the urge to let frustration seep into her voice. Patricia hesitated for a fraction of a second before waving Naomi through. It was a fleeting moment, but one that left Naomi questioning why there had been any hesitation at all. Walking onto the plane, Naomi found her seat in the first-class cabin, placing her bag in the overhead compartment before settling into the plush chair. She glanced out the window, trying to shake off the lingering tension. The cabin was a serene space designed for comfort, but Naomi felt a subtle weight in the air, an unspoken pressure to justify her place among the other passengers. The other travelers in first class exchanged polite greetings or buried themselves in their phones and newspapers. Naomi adjusted her scarf and took a deep breath, determined to enjoy the experience she had rightfully earned. However, her resolve was interrupted by the arrival of a flight attendant. The woman, clad in the airline's crisp uniform, approached Naomi with a professional but firm demeanor. Her name tag read Margaret, and her expression was one of polite skepticism. "Excuse me, ma'am," Margaret began, her tone sharp. "Could I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi's brows furrowed, but she complied, retrieving the pass from her purse. "Here it is." Margaret examined the ticket as though inspecting it for hidden flaws. The pause stretched longer than necessary before she finally said, "This is a first-class ticket. Are you sure this is yours?" The question, veiled in doubt, stung more than Naomi expected. She forced a measured response. "Yes, it is mine. I purchased it." Margaret's lips pursed, and she looked around, as if searching for validation from the other passengers. The tension in the cabin was palpable now, with heads turning and curious eyes settling on Naomi. "I'm just making sure, ma'am," Margaret said, handing the boarding pass back, but not before giving Naomi one final scrutinizing glance. Naomi's grip tightened on the ticket as Margaret walked away. Her pulse quickened, not out of fear, but out of frustration. She had been here before, in boardrooms, at client meetings, in upscale restaurants. The unspoken question, "Do you really belong here?" This moment, in the sanctuary of first class, felt no different. A few rows back, a middle-aged man whispered to his seatmate, his words inaudible, but his smirk evident. Naomi caught the exchange and felt her resolve harden. She was not going to let this moment define her flight, or her worth. But just as she thought the ordeal was over, Margaret returned, this time accompanied by Patricia, the gate attendant. Patricia's expression mirrored the skepticism Naomi had seen earlier. "Ma'am," Patricia began, her voice tinged with a rehearsed politeness, "we just need to double-check your boarding pass again." Naomi's eyes narrowed. "I've already shown it twice." "Is there a problem?" "It's just standard procedure," Patricia replied, though the words rang hollow. Naomi handed over the ticket again, her patience fraying. The two airline employees studied it as if decoding a cipher. A hush had fallen over the cabin, the silence amplifying Naomi's sense of isolation. After what felt like an eternity, Patricia handed the ticket back, her tone clipped. "Thank you, ma'am. Enjoy your flight." Naomi didn't respond. She folded the ticket and placed it back in her purse with deliberate care, willing herself to maintain her composure. The murmurs among the passengers resumed, some voices hushed in sympathy, others in judgment. As the plane began to taxi to the runway, Naomi stared out the window, the city lights below blurring into streaks. The seat, the service, the experience, none of it felt celebratory anymore. Instead, it was a stark reminder that even here, in a space she had earned, she was still seen as an anomaly. But Naomi was no stranger to battles fought in silence. She straightened in her seat, adjusting her scarf with deliberate grace. This moment would not define her. If anything, it would fuel her determination to continue carving out spaces where she belonged, unapologetically. Little did she know, this flight was about to become a defining moment, not just for her, but for everyone watching. The turbulence of truth. As the plane ascended into the night sky, Naomi Carter found herself grappling with a mix of emotions, anger, humiliation, and a deep, aching disappointment. She had purchased this ticket to mark a milestone, to remind herself of how far she had come. But instead of pride, all she felt now was the weight of the unspoken questions lingering in the air around her. The soft ding of the seatbelt sign switching off signaled that passengers were free to move about the cabin. A flight attendant rolled a cart of refreshments down the aisle, her cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped Naomi moments earlier. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" the attendant asked Naomi, her tone polite but distant. "Just water, please," Naomi replied, her voice calm but her mind racing. She needed clarity, a way to process what had just happened. Why had her presence been so suspect? Why had her ticket been questioned not once, but twice? She tried to rationalize it, telling herself it might have been a misunderstanding, but deep down, she knew better. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a heated exchange coming from the economy cabin. A middle-aged man, dressed in a rumpled suit, was arguing with another flight attendant. "I'm telling you, there's been a mistake," he insisted, waving his boarding pass. "I was supposed to be in first class." "I understand your frustration, sir," the attendant replied calmly, "but this is the seat listed on your ticket." The man's voice rose. "Do you know who I am? I've been flying with this airline for over 20 years. I don't belong back here." Naomi watched the scene unfold, a bitter irony settling over her. This man, with his entitlement and indignation, was treated with patience and respect despite his outburst. Yet she, who had followed every protocol with quiet dignity, had been scrutinized and questioned. The murmurs of other passengers drew Naomi's attention back to her own cabin. A young woman seated across the aisle leaned toward her travel companion, whispering in a voice just loud enough to be overheard. "I bet she got upgraded last minute," the woman said, glancing at Naomi. "There's no way she actually paid for that seat." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she refused to react. She had learned long ago that responding to ignorance often did little more than feed it. Still, the sting of the comment lingered, her celebration of success now feeling like an act of defiance. Margaret, the flight attendant who had questioned her earlier, returned to the first-class cabin. She walked briskly, her expression unreadable, until she stopped beside Naomi's seat. Naomi braced herself, expecting another round of questioning, but Margaret surprised her. "Ma'am," Margaret began, her voice lower now, almost apologetic. "I'd like to speak with you privately, if you don't mind." Naomi's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "Of course." Margaret gestured for Naomi to follow her toward the galley area, away from the other passengers. The narrow space was illuminated by the soft glow of overhead lights, the hum of the plane's engines filling the silence between them. "I want to apologize for earlier," Margaret said, her hands clasped in front of her. "There was a mix-up with another passenger's ticket, and it raised some flags on our end. I realize now that I handled the situation poorly." Naomi studied Margaret's face, searching for sincerity. "A mix-up," she repeated, her tone even. "Is that the real reason, or is it just the easier explanation?" Margaret hesitated, the flicker of doubt in her eyes, betraying her polished exterior. I can assure you, ma'am, it wasn't personal." Naomi tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "It may not have felt personal to you, but it certainly did to me. Do you know what it feels like to be questioned in front of a room full of strangers? To have your legitimacy doubted for no other reason than someone's assumptions?" Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but found herself at a loss for words. The weight of Naomi's questions hung heavy in the air, demanding reflection rather than a hollow apology. "I appreciate you acknowledging your actions," Naomi continued, her voice steady but firm. "But acknowledgement without accountability is meaningless. What are you going to do to ensure this doesn't happen to someone else?" Margaret's posture stiffened, as though the gravity of Naomi's words had finally registered. "You're right," she admitted. "I need to do better. We all do. I'll be speaking with my supervisor about how we can address this." Before Naomi could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps interrupted their conversation. A man in a tailored suit approached, his airline badge identifying him as the onboard manager. "Ms. Carter," he began, addressing Naomi directly, "I was just informed about the situation. On behalf of the airline, I want to extend my sincerest apologies for the way you were treated. This is not the level of service we strive to provide." Naomi crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Your apology is noted, but it doesn't change what happened." The manager nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right. That's why we're taking immediate action. We've already identified training gaps that need to be addressed, and we'll be implementing measures to ensure incidents like this don't occur in the future." Naomi raised an eyebrow, skeptical, but willing to listen. "What kind of measures?" "For starters," the manager explained, "we'll be conducting a review of our protocols to eliminate any unconscious biases in how we handle passengers. Additionally, we'll be implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all our staff." Naomi considered his words carefully. While it wasn't a complete solution, it was a step in the right direction. "I hope you're serious about following through," she said finally. "Because this isn't just about me. It's about every person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong." The manager nodded. "We are serious, Ms. Carter. And I assure you, your feedback will be part of that change." As Naomi returned to her seat, the weight on her shoulders felt slightly lighter. She wasn't naive enough to believe that one conversation would fix everything, but she also knew the power of speaking up. Her actions today might not erase the bias she had faced, but they could spark a ripple effect, one that challenged others to do better. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but Naomi's mind remained restless. She replayed the events in her head, wondering how many other people had endured similar experiences without the opportunity to demand accountability. This moment, though painful, reaffirmed her commitment to using her voice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. As the plane touched down and the cabin lights brightened, Naomi looked out at the city skyline. Her journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to confront whatever turbulence lay ahead. Ripples of resistance. The wheels of the plane touched the tarmac with a soft jolt, pulling Naomi Carter out of her introspection. She glanced around the first-class cabin, noting the quiet hum of activity as passengers gathered their belongings. Her confrontation with the airline staff had left a lingering tension in the air, one that even the plush, serene surroundings of first class couldn't dissipate. Naomi waited until the aisle cleared before rising from her seat. She adjusted her blazer and retrieved her carry-on, her movements deliberate and composed. The eyes of a few passengers followed her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite place, sympathy, perhaps, or guilt. As she exited the jet bridge, Naomi's phone buzzed with notifications. She pulled it from her bag, expecting a calendar reminder or a congratulatory message from a colleague about her recent promotion. Instead, her social media feed was flooded with posts from fellow passengers who had witnessed the incident. A particularly striking tweet caught her eye. Just witnessed a woman in first class being questioned repeatedly about her ticket. She handled it with grace, but it was so unnecessary. Why do we still have to deal with this kind of bias? #airline bias, #do better. Naomi paused mid-stride, her breath catching. Someone had seen her struggle, not just seen it, but named it. The hashtag was already gaining traction, with dozens of people adding their voices to the conversation. Some shared similar stories of being questioned or judged, while others expressed outrage at the treatment she had endured. As she scrolled, Naomi's feelings shifted from discomfort to determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a systemic issue that so many people had faced, often in silence. By the time Naomi arrived at her hotel, the story had gained momentum. National news outlets had picked it up, and the airline had issued a statement promising a thorough investigation. Naomi read the statement with a mix of satisfaction and skepticism. It was carefully worded, designed to placate public outrage without admitting fault. Still, the attention was undeniable. Her email inbox overflowed with messages from reporters seeking interviews, advocacy groups offering support, and strangers sharing their own stories of bias and discrimination. Naomi sat on the edge of the hotel bed, her laptop balanced on her knees. She hesitated for a moment before opening a blank document. She had always been a private person, preferring to let her work speak for itself. But this time felt different. She couldn't let the narrative end with a corporate apology and a promise to do better. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. I didn't intend for my flight yesterday to become a public spectacle. Like many of you, I was simply trying to travel from one place to another. But what happened to me isn't unique. It's a reflection of deeper issues in our society, issues that demand our attention and action. I've spent my entire life navigating spaces where I was often the only one who looked like me, spoke like me, or came from my background. And while I've achieved success, moments like yesterday remind me that bias doesn't disappear just because you've earned a seat at the table, or, in this case, a seat on the plane. To the airline, I appreciate your acknowledgement of the incident, but words alone aren't enough. I urge you to turn this moment into a catalyst for real change. And to everyone who has shared their stories or expressed support, thank you. Your voices matter. Together, we can demand a world where no one's worth is questioned based on assumptions or prejudice. Naomi read through the statement twice before posting it on her social media accounts. She attached the hashtag seat at the table, a phrase that encapsulated her experience and her message. Within minutes, the post began to garner likes, shares, and comments. The following morning, Naomi awoke to her phone buzzing incessantly. The story had gone viral overnight. Celebrities, activists, and even political figures had weighed in, amplifying her message. A few influential voices had shared her post, turning #seat at the table into a trending topic. Naomi's phone rang, the caller ID showing an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Ms. Carter, this is Angela Torres, the Vice President of Corporate Communications for the airline. I'd like to personally apologize for what happened and discuss how we can make amends. Naomi took a measured breath. Thank you for reaching out, Ms. Torres. I'm willing to have that conversation, but I want to be clear, this isn't just about me. It's about addressing the systemic issues that allowed this to happen in the first place. Understood, Angela replied. We're taking this very seriously. Our CEO would like to meet with you to discuss a partnership aimed at creating a more inclusive travel experience. Naomi's eyebrows raised in surprise. A partnership? Yes, Angela explained. We're planning to launch an initiative focused on equity and inclusion training for our staff, and we'd like your input. Your voice has sparked a national conversation, and we believe it's important to involve you in shaping the solution. Naomi agreed to meet, but she remained cautious. She had seen too many corporate initiatives fizzle out, their good intentions overshadowed by a lack of follow-through. Still, this was an opportunity to create real change, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. The meeting was held in a sleek, glass-walled conference room at the airline's headquarters. Naomi sat across from the CEO, Angela, and several members of the leadership team. They listened intently as she recounted her experience, emphasizing the broader implications of the incident. "This isn't just about one flight or one passenger," Naomi said. "It's about challenging the biases that permeate every level of our society, including your organization. If you're serious about making a change, you need to go beyond apologies and promises. You need to take concrete action." The CEO nodded. "We couldn't agree more, Ms. Carter. That's why we're proposing a multi-step plan, starting with comprehensive bias training for all employees. We'd also like to establish a passenger advocacy council, and we'd be honored if you would chair it." Naomi leaned back in her chair, processing the offer. Chairing a council would be a significant commitment, but it was also a chance to influence policies that could benefit countless others. "I'll consider it," she replied. "But I'll need to see a detailed plan first. Words are important, but actions are what matter." The CEO smiled. "Fair enough. We'll have a proposal ready for your review by the end of the week." As Naomi left the meeting, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She hadn't asked to become a symbol of resilience or a catalyst for change, but she wasn't going to shy away from the role either. This moment was bigger than her, a chance to turn her personal pain into a collective victory. Walking out into the crisp morning air, Naomi tightened her grip on her bag. She wasn't just traveling anymore, she was moving forward, one deliberate step at a time. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, it felt like she wasn't walking it alone. Breaking through barriers. The weeks following Naomi Carter's meeting with the airline's leadership team were a whirlwind. The story that began with a boarding pass and a seat assignment had evolved into a national movement. #Seat at the table had grown beyond social media, sparking town hall discussions, corporate diversity initiatives, and even coverage on major news outlets. But while the public attention was gratifying, Naomi knew the true challenge lay in ensuring the promises made by the airline didn't dissolve into empty words. As she reviewed the detailed proposal for the Passenger Advocacy Council, Naomi saw both potential and pitfalls. The plan included regular training for employees, revised protocols for ticket verification, and a commitment to hire more diverse staff across all levels. Yet, it lacked mechanisms for accountability, real checks and balances to ensure these changes were implemented and sustained. Naomi agreed to chair the council, but on one condition: she demanded the power to audit the airline's progress and report findings publicly. This level of transparency was unusual, even controversial, but Naomi wouldn't settle for less. If she was going to lend her name to this initiative, it had to stand for something meaningful. The first council meeting. The inaugural meeting of the Passenger Advocacy Council was held at a community center in Chicago. Naomi chose the location deliberately. She wanted the council's work to feel accessible, grounded in the experiences of everyday travelers. The council included representatives from diverse backgrounds, a disability rights advocate, a single mother who often flew with her children, a veteran who faced challenges during travel, and a young Black entrepreneur who had experienced similar biases to Naomi's. As Naomi addressed the room, she felt the weight of the moment. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but passionate. "This council isn't just about fixing one airline or addressing one incident. It's about transforming how we approach travel as a society. Every traveler, regardless of their appearance, ability, or background, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." The room buzzed with energy as the council began brainstorming solutions. Ideas ranged from enhanced training modules for employees to better accessibility features on planes. They also discussed the possibility of creating a hotline for passengers to report incidents of discrimination in real time. One council member, Maria Alvarez, a wheelchair user, shared her own harrowing experience. "It's not just about being questioned or overlooked," she said. "It's about feeling invisible. People need to know they have a voice and that their complaints won't just disappear into a void." Naomi nodded. "Exactly. We need to build systems that not only address bias, but actively dismantle the structures that allow it to persist." By the end of the meeting, the council had drafted a list of priorities. At the top was a commitment to advocate for broader industry-wide reforms, not just changes within a single airline. Naomi knew this was an ambitious goal, but ambition had always been her fuel. The pushback. As Naomi's visibility grew, so did the resistance. Critics questioned her motives, accusing her of seeking fame or financial gain. Online trolls flooded her inbox with hateful messages, attempting to undermine her credibility. One particularly scathing article labeled her a corporate agitator, claiming she was overreacting to a minor inconvenience. Naomi leaned on her support network to weather the storm. Her best friend, Alicia, was her anchor, always reminding her of the bigger picture. "Naomi, you're not just fighting for yourself," Alicia said during one of their late-night calls. "You're fighting for all of us. Let them talk. They'll see the impact of your work soon enough." Still, the negativity took its toll. There were nights when Naomi questioned whether she had the strength to keep pushing forward. But every time doubt crept in, she thought about the messages of support she had received, the woman who thanked her for speaking out, the father who said his daughter now saw a role model in Naomi. One evening, as she scrolled through her emails, a message caught her eye. It was from a young man named Malik, who wrote, "Ms. Carter, I saw your story and just wanted to thank you. I've always dreamed of traveling the world, but I've been scared of how I'll be treated. You've given me hope that things can change. Please don't stop fighting." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. Malik's words reminded her why she couldn't give up. This wasn't just about her, it was about creating a better world for people like Malik, people who deserve to dream without fear. Building bridges. The council's work began to bear fruit. The airline implemented its first round of bias training, with Naomi attending the sessions to observe and provide feedback. She was pleased to see that the training went beyond surface-level fixes, delving into the psychology of bias and its impact on decision-making. Employees were encouraged to share their own experiences and reflect on how unconscious biases could influence their interactions with passengers. At the same time, the hotline Naomi had championed was launched. Within weeks, it was receiving dozens of calls daily, many from passengers who had never felt empowered to report incidents before. The data collected from these calls became a valuable tool for identifying patterns and targeting areas for improvement. Naomi also began collaborating with other airlines, encouraging them to adopt similar measures. While some were receptive, others were resistant, unwilling to acknowledge the depth of the problem. Naomi pressed on, using her growing platform to advocate for industry-wide change. A personal victory. Amid the whirlwind of public work, Naomi experienced a deeply personal triumph. One afternoon, she received a call from her mother, Ruth, who had always been her biggest supporter but also her toughest critic. "Naomi," Ruth said, her voice filled with emotion. "I saw your interview on TV today. I want you to know how proud I am of you." Naomi smiled, her throat tightening. "Thank you, Mom. That means everything to me." Ruth hesitated before continuing. "You know, when you were little, I used to worry about the world you'd grow up in. I worried about how it would treat you. But seeing what you're doing now, it gives me hope. You're changing the world, Naomi." Naomi sat in silence for a moment, letting her mother's words sink in. She had always measured her success by her professional achievements, but this, her mother's pride, felt like the ultimate validation. As Naomi prepared for the council's next meeting, she reflected on how far they had come, and how much further they had to go. The fight for equity and inclusion was far from over, but for the first time it felt winnable. The ripples of her actions were growing into waves, and she was determined to ride them to shore. Naomi Carter had earned her seat at the table, but now she was building a bigger table, one with room for everyone. Soaring toward change. Months passed, and the momentum behind Naomi Carter's efforts only grew. The Passenger Advocacy Council had become a model for other organizations, both within and outside the airline industry. Naomi's name was frequently mentioned in discussions about equity and inclusion, and her story had inspired countless others to challenge the status quo. Yet, Naomi knew that lasting change required vigilance and persistence. The road to true equity was not a straight line but a winding path filled with challenges. As she prepared for a major industry summit where she was set to deliver the keynote address, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, and the responsibility she now carried. The summit. The summit, hosted in Washington, D.C., was a gathering of industry leaders, policymakers, and advocates from around the world. The theme was Transforming Travel, Building Bridges for a More Inclusive Future, and Naomi's keynote was the highlight of the event. Standing backstage, Naomi adjusted the microphone clipped to her blazer. She could hear the murmur of the audience, a mix of anticipation and curiosity. She had practiced her speech countless times, but the weight of the moment still felt immense. When her name was announced, the room erupted into applause. Naomi stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking against the polished floor, and took her place at the podium. She scanned the audience, her gaze settling on a mix of familiar faces and strangers. Taking a deep breath, she began. "Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to stand before you today, not just as an advocate but as a traveler, someone who has experienced both the beauty and the challenges of our interconnected world. Travel is more than a means of getting from one place to another. It's a gateway to new experiences, new cultures, and new connections. But for too many people, the act of traveling is fraught with barriers of bias, discrimination, and exclusion. These barriers are not always visible, but their impact is deeply felt. I know this, because I've lived it. Many of you are familiar with my story, the moment on a flight when my right to a first-class seat was questioned, not because of anything I did, but because of who I am. That moment was painful, but it was also a catalyst. It forced me to confront a reality that so many face, but so few have the platform to address. Today, I want to talk about what it means to transform our industry. True transformation isn't about surface-level changes or one-time initiatives. It's about embedding equity into the DNA of our organizations. It's about creating systems that value every traveler, every employee, and every voice. This is hard work. It requires humility, accountability, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. But it is also rewarding work, because when we make travel more inclusive, we don't just change policies, we change lives. The audience was silent, hanging on Naomi's every word. As she continued, she shared tangible examples of the progress her council had achieved. The hotline that had handled over 10,000 calls, identifying key areas of improvement. A mentorship program for underrepresented communities aspiring to work in aviation. Collaborative efforts with other industries, from hotels to car rental agencies, to adopt inclusive practices. She ended with a call to action: transformation is a journey, not a destination. It's a process that requires all of us, leaders, employees, and passengers alike, to take responsibility for the spaces we create. Together, we can build an industry where every traveler feels seen, valued, and respected. Let's not just aim for progress, let's aim for a new standard. The room erupted into a standing ovation as Naomi stepped back from the podium. She felt a rush of gratitude and determination. This was no longer just her fight, it was a shared mission. A personal journey. Despite her public successes, Naomi knew the importance of personal growth. The incident on the plane had not only exposed systemic bias, but also forced her to confront her own vulnerabilities. She began journaling regularly, reflecting on her experiences and the lessons they held. One entry stood out. "I've learned that belonging isn't something others grant you, it's something you claim for yourself. The world may question your place, but your worth is not up for debate." My voice matters, not because I'm perfect, but because I'm persistent. Naomi also sought ways to connect more deeply with her roots. She traveled to her grandmother's hometown in Georgia, a place she hadn't visited in years. There, amidst the quiet beauty of the countryside, she found clarity and a renewed sense of purpose. Her grandmother, now in her 80s, had always been a source of wisdom. As they sat together on the porch one evening, Naomi shared her journey. "You've done good, child," her grandmother said, her voice steady, despite her age. "But remember, this fight isn't just about you. It's about all the people who came before you and all the ones who'll come after. Keep walking tall, no matter how heavy the load gets." Those words stayed with Naomi, a reminder of the legacy she was carrying forward. A collective victory. The airline industry began to see tangible changes. Other airlines adopted similar counsels, bias training programs, and passenger advocacy measures. Travelers reported feeling safer and more respected, and complaints of discrimination dropped significantly. Naomi's work extended beyond the airline industry. She was invited to collaborate with transportation authorities, hospitality groups, and even tech companies on creating more inclusive practices. Her story became a case study in business schools, a testament to the power of resilience and advocacy. One day, Naomi received an email from Malik, the young man who had written to her months earlier. Attached was a photo of him standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, his smile radiant. "Ms. Carter, I did it. I took my first international trip. Thank you for giving me the courage to believe I could." Naomi stared at the photo, tears welling in her eyes. This was why she fought, not for recognition or accolades, but for moments like this. The legacy. Years later, Naomi would look back on this chapter of her life with pride. She had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement for change. Her name became synonymous with advocacy and resilience, but what mattered most to her was the impact she had made. Naomi Carter didn't just earn her seat at the table, she helped build a world where no one had to fight for theirs. And as she watched a new generation of leaders rise, she knew the future was in good hands. The sky, once a place of doubt, had become a symbol of boundless possibility. Naomi had not only soared above the challenges, she had cleared the way for others to do the same.